Account-based marketing is one of the best strategies you can use to generate pipeline and profit within your B2B company. Over 71% of marketers agree with the statement, and I agree with that statement because I have a B2B agency where we have worked with B2B SaaS, consultancies, enterprise, professional services, and we came to the same conclusion where ABM is the best strategy for pipeline and for growth. However, when it comes to ABM, it can be very confusing on firstly what it is, how do you execute it, what the channels to use, and everything in between. So in this video, I'm going to give you my 2026 playbook for ABM on how you can generate results, which will increase your profit, increase your pipeline, and of course, get your growth and your company to where you want it to be by the end of the year. So firstly, what is ABM? So ABM is account-based marketing, and it's very different from traditional demand generation because demand generation is essentially you're pushing out a bunch of different content, outreach, whatever it could be, to see who's going to raise their hand and say, yes, this looks interesting. Now, the issue with this is the people that raise their hand aren't necessarily a fit for your ideal client persona and the services that you have as well. And so typically it's just very challenging to break into the accounts that you want to because it's essentially a spray and pray methodology. However, account-based marketing is very, very specific. The idea is that we're putting together a list of our companies, a list of our leads at those companies who are on the buying committee, decision makers, everything in between. And then we're doing a specialized targeting across different channels to engage with those types of people at those companies specifically. And so it's just hyper targeted when you're doing your type of marketing and your sales. And essentially, what it is doing is it's combining both departments of marketing and sales, which is really cool to see because typically within companies, you have marketing in one area, sales in another area, and they don't speak to each other. However, what this is doing is flipping it on its head, where sales and marketing comes together. Sales helps marketing build this list on who they want to go after. Marketing creates the channels and the necessary types of components to engage with those people and then get those leads into the front door for sales. Now, what ABM could look like if it's done successfully. So one of our clients actually generated $1.1 million in pipeline in 30 days with a really cool and unique ABM strategy. And so we're going to go through the different types of ABM strategies and channels you can work on. But ultimately, ABM could be very, very creative in the way you do it. Now, the first step in any ABM strategy is who are my target accounts and who are the leads at those companies. So the first step is to map our TAM, which is a total addressable market. So this is where we're doing our list building exercise on identifying who are the dream, say 100 companies that we want to break into. And now we're going to map for each organization who is the buying committee that we need to be targeting on our marketing side with our different channels that we have. Because the reason why we do this is because we want to be figuring out how can we engage with them specifically in order to get a conversation flowing with them to then move them across, obviously, to create an opportunity. Now, this is a very important step, and it's a step that most people think they can do just very easily by buying a list somewhere or something like that. But data is very, very important when it comes to the ABM because ultimately you're going to be putting a lot of resources into these strategies. So you need to make sure the list is clean, it's refined, and it's exactly who you want to target. The different tools you can do to build this out is, there's so many different ones, right? So Apollo is a great one. Zoom Info is very expensive, so I don't really recommend them, but they can help you build a list as well. But ultimately, all these data platforms pull from LinkedIn. So you can just use LinkedIn Sales Now first to map out the dream companies and the dream contacts at those companies first to understand what their audience looks like. Now, one thing I would also urge you to do now that we're in the era of AI is you can also, once you've pulled out these lists, is send it over to AI, and AI can then rank them as well by looking again on the website, on their LinkedIn, on all the different metadata that it has on how good of a fit is it for ABM on what we're trying to do here and our target accounts. Because ultimately, what you find with data providers is that some of the data is inaccurate, some of it is outdated. And so once you pull this list, I like to then go through with AI and it goes through line by line each company, and then each of the accounts as well to make sure it is a fit for who we're trying to go after. Now, in 2026, we also have a bunch of signals that we can tap into as well. So, signals in lead generation is where we see through data that a company has done something or a lead has done something, and we can pull that out as a signal and say, this is a reason why they're going to be in our dream accounts because they've shown a level of intent or shown that they need this type of service or products. And Signals is very interesting because it is very cool to see that they like to post, which is relevant to our ideal client persona, but shows that they could be in the buying decision right now, or the fact that they're hiring for this certain role, and that could be a trigger, or that they raise Series A, for example, and that could be a trigger. But the issue with triggers and something you need to be very careful of is that a lot of them are very lagging, right? They're very delayed. And so potentially you could be reaching out saying, yeah, they're a fit because of XYZ signal, but that signal might not be very accurate. It might not be a fit. And so just bear that in mind if you're going down the signals pathway is yes, look at them, but just understand there's some nuance to them as well. Now, step two is around messaging. So messaging is very interesting because right now we're seeing a lot of AI personalization and all these different things that are happening. However, over personalization is something that's killing ABM right now. And so what I say by doing some type of personalization is doing research into the companies, the accounts themselves, and just understanding what are their watering holes. And so what I mean by this is for different groups of your ideal client profiles and personas, let's say for example, CTOs is one of your ones, then you want to understand where do they consume their content, where do they consume their media, and what types of groups are they in, what types of areas on the internet do they live on, and then you can tap into those different areas and those channels. And so the reason why this is really interesting is because we can then understand our ideal clients on a deeper level, understand how and where we need to engage them, because ultimately engaging them in an area which, they're not going to be open to communicating on. And we saw this, for example, with a cybersecurity company who wanted to run cold emails going after people within security in different enterprises. Now, naturally, as an ICP, they're going to be very closed off to cold email, right? It's seen as spammy, it's seen as all these different things. And so you need to understand, based on these different personas that we've mapped, what is the right channels for them. Now, when it comes down to channels, you have a few different options. LinkedIn ads is one of the channels that you can use for ABM. So LinkedIn ads is running paid promotion on the LinkedIn platform. Now, it's really cool because you can get very targeted on who you want to see your ad, which is great. However, your CPMs, which is essentially your cost on LinkedIn, is just very, very high when you compare it to other types of paid advertising channels. So you need to understand that there is going to be a lot of money that's needed to get that channel moving. However, I think as an awareness channel, it's really great to just stay top of mind and in front of your ideal clients. And so setting aside maybe 5 to 10,000 a month for LinkedIn ads is a strategy that works really well. However, you want to understand that it is a cost, right? It is quite high of a cost every single month to be spending that on there. So there are some other channels which you can explore. Another one is webinars. So webinars are really cool because what they get is it's firstly a one-to-many approach. So you can essentially have leverage in this process. And the cool thing is that they can see your face, you can educate them on their problems, on the solutions available, and obviously at the end is your CTA. Now, webinars have worked really well in the past, but what we're seeing year on year is webinars in terms of how well they perform is just going down and down and down. And this might be because of there's been so many webinars that people just aren't joining them anymore, or the fact that media can actually be consumed on things like YouTube rather than a live event. And so bear that in mind when you're going to run a webinar is yes, it can work, but understand that there's so many metrics of that funnel which you need to get in line from firstly opt-in to show up rates to then them staying on the webinar as well. All these things come into play. Another ABM approach is going to be around events and conferences. So as I said before about finding where the watering holes are, let's say there's a B2B SaaS conference and you're going after SaaS companies, then great, that makes sense to attend that type of event. Now, when it comes to events, you need to be wary on, firstly, does it make sense to get a booth or not? Because booths can be very expensive. The other thing you need to be wary of is when I engage someone at an event, what is the next logical step? Right? Because so many times you go to an event, you leave with a bunch of business cards, some phone numbers, some emails, but ultimately it doesn't turn into anything. And so you want to understand how are we going to essentially engage people there? How are we going to get a next step booked in? For example, are we going to meet them there and then and say, oh, by the way, we have a podcast. We'd love to have you on our podcast next week. Like, let's book in some time now to discuss it in more detail. Really great strategy. But there's so many different ways you can do it, very creative, but ultimately you need a next logical step principle added into this workflow if you're going to events. Another one is cold email and outbound. So cold email is essentially sending out like sales orientated emails to your ideal clients that you've mapped within this account list. Now, Cold emails are great. I do think it's a really cool channel because it is very scalable, right? You can just increase volume when you need to, which is great. But it is getting harder to land in the inbox now. And people have this blindness to cold emails because ultimately, like, think about it. When was the last time you responded to a cold email that you remember? Like, you probably don't even remember the last one you got. So ultimately, you need to understand for your persona, does it make sense to go the transactional kind of sales orientated route with cold email or LinkedIn DMs and things like that? Because it can leave a bad taste in your prospect's mouth. And ultimately, if we're going after very specific accounts, we don't want to burn those leads. And doing cold email in the traditional sense will burn leads, getting unsubscribes and people telling you to essentially go away. Another one is to do retargeting on other platforms such as Meta. Now, Meta is really interesting because what you can do is you can essentially upload a list of audiences that you want to have and want to target, and it will do some matching on the back end to create essentially an audience of those types of people. Now, the matching rate isn't always the best overall, so just bear that in mind, but it is a strategy to go down if you want to retarget them with that type of paid media. Another way is going to be just standard organic media. So, organic media is really cool because, of course, you can have, say, for example, you're going down the podcast route, you can have a podcast as long form, which can get split up into loads of different short form videos, which can then target those types of accounts. Now, it's more of an awareness play overall because it's not really targeted at them. You're not landing in their inbox or anything like that. But just bear in mind that if they are connected with you on LinkedIn or they follow one of your people at the company, then yes, content can be something which can help engage them and eventually get them through into the pipeline stage. Now, the final and my favorite strategy for ABM is actually the B2B podcast ABM strategy. So this is a really cool strategy because it tackles so many different things in one action. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to target the dream leads that we have and saying, "Hey, would you love to come on my podcast? Like, I'd love to interview you." And so it's very, very just chill way of engaging with them and getting a foot in the door, getting a relationship built with them, and getting a conversation booked in. So our strategy is we'll invite them onto our podcast. We'll say, "Hey, we'd love to have you on. Let's book an intro call in for next week." And then we can have a conversation one-on-one with them, which builds relationship, which builds rapport. And then naturally from that conversation, potentially there's a sales opportunity from there, right? You've understood them a bit more. You can educate them a little bit more as well on that call and then see what the next step could be. However, what I really love about this is then the content element that comes off the back of it. So if you think about your ideal client persona being in this type of this circle here, and now that ideal client in their network have more people who is your ideal client as well. And so when the content is shared and they engage with it, they share it themselves and everything, you can then drive just more awareness and top of funnel engagement from your ideal clients again, right? So you can build more just leverage from this one action of having a podcast. And that content as well will then roll out and anyone else on your target list can then engage with it, can see it and get value from it as well. So it's just very, very great to get high reply rates on getting those invitations sent out. It's really high on getting trust and authority and rapport built early on. It's a really great way to then get the content byproduct for the organic strategy to then push out. So it's just very, very leveraged. Now, the last step with ABM is how you measure success. So typically for ABM it is a longer sales cycle. Of course it is, because naturally it takes time to get into those accounts, to build the trust, build the authority that you need to as well. And so something you need to track on this is firstly, when they do eventually become a customer and you can audit your previous customers, is have maybe a client interview with them where you ask them, what types of content did you consume prior? What did that look like? And you can essentially try and map out the attribution funnel and how many touch points it took across the different channels to get them through into a paying client. But typically for high ticket services, right, it's going to be a 3, 6, or 9 month time period to get some type of ROI from it, especially if you're doing some of the other channels that I mentioned before, which do take just more time to execute. Now, there are some more direct approaches. As I said, cold email is very direct. You might be able to uncover sales opportunities quicker. The B2B podcast strategy is very direct as well because you have a direct conversation with them. But some of the more, like content plays, webinars and such can just take more time for it to deliver the results. So should you build your ABM strategy in-house or should you outsource it to an agency? So this is a huge question because a lot of people want to run it internally, but the issue with running it internally is when it comes down to tech costs, data, best practices and everything, you're starting from scratch. And so what I recommend to clients is, look, if you want to have an ABM strategy, you can work with an ABM partner first learn how it all works, and then you can start to build it internally as well, right? Once you've seen proof of concept, ROI, and all these different things as well. But ultimately, speed is what's going to prove the channel first. And so if you can get started without having all of this stuff you have to learn, then that's going to help you out massively. Now, when it comes to choosing the right ABM partner, like an agency, there's a few questions you need to ask. Firstly, when it comes to list building, how do you understand our ideal client persona? How do you put these lists together? And essentially audit their process for this, because all of this stems from the list. And if the lists are bad, then the ABM strategy will also be bad and it won't generate you the results you're looking for. The other thing you want to look at is the pricing mechanism. There's certain ABM partners out there or agencies that essentially sign you on a very, very high retainer with no type of clear outcomes at the end of it. So it's just an ongoing fee. Now, the way I like to work is we have very clear, essentially, objectives on, look, every month, our goal is to get you 4 to 8 conversations, for example. And then obviously we do the podcasting. So that was all tackled on the end of that as well. But ultimately, we're very clear on what it is that they get in terms of a business outcome. And also, if people are promising things like actual revenue, you need to understand that they're probably just trying to get you to close. Because ultimately, unless they're taking over the sales component as well and taking sales calls and closing sales calls, they don't have the control over the end outcome of sales. So you need to understand what are the metrics that they can actually influence, what are the metrics that they have power over to actually get results for, and understanding that if they're promising and over promising, that is a red flag that you need to look out for. So I hope this helped you understand what ABM is, the different channels you have, the different ways you can do it. Ultimately, ABM is a very, very powerful strategy. I recommend it to all B2B companies to look into and figure out how you can make it work for yourself. If you'd like to book some time in with me or my team, the link's in the description. Happy to talk with you to see how we can get your ABM strategy up and running and performing in just the next 30 or 60 days.